Okay, Boker Tov, good morning, everybody. So let's pick it up. We're coming towards the end of the second paragraph of Masechet Beitzah. We're in Daf Kaf Bet Amud Bet. We were looking at the Mishnah. Let's pick it up from the Mishnah. It's about halfway down the Amud. In Daf Kaf Bet Amud Bet. Says the Mishnah, Afu Amal Shloshah Dvarim Lakel. Right, we saw the previous Mishnah quoted three things which regarding Yom Tov, which Rabban Gamliel said to be Machmir, and now these are three halachot about which Rabban Gamliel said to be Makir. So, מכבדים בית המיטות ומניחים את המוגמר ביום טוב ועושים קדים מקולס בלילי פסחים וחכמים מוסרים. Okay, so these are the three things Rashi points out when it says חכמים מוסרים. At the end of the Mishnah, it's not referring to just the third din, but it's referring to all three, which Rabban Gamliel says mutar, חכמים says asur. So what are they? מכבדים בית המיטות, to sweep the floors. Okay, it's called Beit HaMitot. This is the place where you eat because, as we know from Pesach, in those days they would eat on mitot. They would eat on couches or beds or reclining, not like nowadays. Which is, by the way, which is an interesting question which comes up. We talk about it every year, but we're coming up to Pesach. It's not that far away. Okay, try not to get a heart attack, but it's not that far away, Pesach. But the question of reclining. Right, as we know that we recline and we drink the 4 cups of wine and we eat matzah and other things because it's derech cherut, because that's the way that free people eat. But then the question is asked, nowadays nobody eats like that, right? So that's the Ravya, the famous Ravya, who says that since nowadays we don't actually eat in that way, there is no obligation our day for a seva. We don't paskin that way. We paskin like the other Rishonim who say that no, it's irrelevant what we do nowadays. The fact is that back then, right, the whole Seder night, the whole experience is a journey in time. We're going back to what was back in the times when we left Egypt, and then the normal way to eat was to recline. Therefore, we do take the account of the Ravya. We do take it into account. So if you have situations of doubt, questions regarding women, if they have to lean, what if a person forgot under certain circumstances? Would you go back and drink again? So we would take into account that there is an opinion that says you don't have to in the first place. But before Pesach, we'll get into more details of that. But in any event, that's why it's called Beit HaMitot. So Rabban Gamliel says, you're allowed to sweep the floors. What would be the problem with sweeping the floors? So again, on our floors, which are tiles and everything is straight, you don't really have an issue. But again, if it's dirt and you're sweeping the floor which is outside, or the floor which is inside, which is just the dirt floor, and you're straightening out, it might be a related to the what's called a shvuye gumot, that you have ditches and things that you are filling up when you sweep, and it might be related to the prohibition of choresh, to the melacha of plowing. Okay, so that was number one. Number two was, we said manichin et mugmar b'yom tov. You place this incense, right? You take this spice and you place it on coals in order to create a nice spice on Yom Tov. It's a very nice smell. And Rabban Gamliel allows this. Chachamim do not allow it because they say this is not... sorry, just one moment. Okay, they do not allow this because it is not shaveh l'chol nefesh. As we've said many times that... to perform melacha in Yom Tov, you're allowed to perform melacha of ochel nefesh, but it has to be shaveh l'kol nefesh, meaning it has to be a normal need that normal people would do, not something that is only a luxury. Okay, and finally we said v'osim kdim kulas b'leilei psachim. Okay, this is the type of way of cooking this of cooking a goat on. Sort of like a goat on a spit. That's the way that you would cook on the night of Yom Tov. The question is, again, this is very similar to the way that they would do the Korban Pesach. Rabban Gamliel says it's allowed, but Chachamim say no, because it's similar to, it looks like you're eating kodshim b'chutz. So says the Gemara, so those are all the three halachot, and Chachamim Osrin. Rabban Gamliel is lakel. Chachamim Osrin. Says the Gemara, Mav Asi. Machloket legamer, okay, so here we're dealing with the second case. We said about this incense, about this mugmar. Rav Asi says the machloket between Rabban Gamliel and Chachamim is only about placing it legamer. In other words, when you are doing the spices, they would use it to give clothes and to give different things a good spice. If you're going to try and put the spice sort of into your clothes, that would be forbidden. Aval la riach, But if it's just to create a nice smell that's sort of going to go in the air and that you're going to enjoy, that he says divrei kol mutar. That he says that would be allowed. So let's see Rashi. He says machloket legamer. כשאסרו חכמים לא אסרו אלא כשמניחו כדי לגמר בו כלים. Okay, and as we saw previously, kelim, we sort of used to thinking of pots and pans when we say kelim, but it also refers to clothes. So he says that which the Chachamim said no, they said that's when you place it, you place this spice, this incense, to have a smell that's going to go in your clothes. שנותן המחתיים הלבונה וכחלים תחת הבגדים להכניס בין ריח. You place it and you in such a way that the smell is going to go into your clothes. This is not for your personal benefit, well, not for the benefit of your goof, of your body, but it's for objects, or clothes, etc. And that is not going to be shaver kol nefesh. He says, however, just to place this incense on the coals, just to make a smell, that would be mutar. That is considered bodily, physical benefit, and that is basically ochel nefesh. Vashta lemaida kamar of asi lo aveitam adrabanan mishum davar shaveh lekol nefesh kedebereshit leel ela mishum delekshot kelimu. So he says, according to this explanation of Rav Ashi, right, it's not actually the discussion that we spoke about before, that whether it's about shaveh lekol nefesh or not. The way that's how Rashi had explained earlier. But the way the Rav Asi now interprets it, it's about whether you do it for yourself or you do it for your clothes, and then that's just not ochel nefesh at all. Mishum delekshot kelimu u'mechaven rakaman hada be'mechamat kushia. And says Rashi, don't worry. He says ultimately in the continuation of the Gemara, Rav Asi is actually going to chozer bo. He's going to change his mind. And therefore, Rashi stays with his conclusion that the discussion here is relating to whether it's shaveh lekol nefesh or not. Okay, but at this point, Rav Asi he makes a distinction between whether you're doing the smugma just have the smell in your house, or whether you're doing it actually to get the smell into clothes, etc. So that's what the Gemara says. So says the Gemara now, meitive. We're going to challenge that from the following braita. En mechabdin beit hamitot beyom tov. Okay, so similar to what we saw in well, this really it's a Tosefta, but similar to what we saw in our Mishnah, it says you don't sweep the floors on Yom Tov, and in Rabban Gamliel's house they would sweep. So Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok, פעמים הרבה נכנסתי אחר אבא לבית רבן גמליel. Says Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok, says many times we went to the house of Rabban Gamliel. ולא היו מכבדים בית המיטות ביום טוב, אלא מכבדים אותן מערב יום טוב. So what would they do? They wouldn't sweep the floors on Yom Tov. They would sweep them on Erev Yom Tov. ופוסין עליהם סטינים, and they would place large sheets that they would put down on the ground. למחר, כשהאורחים נכנסים, מסרקים את הסטינים, ונמצא הבית מתכבד מאליו. And the next day, which is Yom Tov, so when the guests would come in, what they would do, they would take these sheets, now all the rubbish and all the things, the crumbs, etc., that had fallen onto the floor were now on these sheets, and they would lift them up, and they would move them, and the house would sweep itself, so to speak. I mean, now the floor is clean because everything that was dirty on the floor was on top of these sheets, and you've taken them away. So Amrulo, so that's what Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok says. Meaning, we said that there's a machloket between the Chachamim and Rabban Gamliel whether you can sweep the floors on Yom Tov. So Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok says this is the way. How would they sweep the floors? They would just take these sheets and move them away. They weren't actually sweeping. So the Chachamim say to him, right? What are you talking about? That what's the problem with that? If that's what they were doing, if that's what Rabbi Gamliel was talking about, he says even on Shabbos you can do that. That doesn't. There's no reason to be machmir on that specific case, and therefore. Sorry, I just keep losing the place. All right, in other words. that you could do even on Shabbat. Therefore, no, when we say, Chachamim are saying to Rabbi Eliezer, when we say the machloket between Rabban Gamliel and Chachamim about what you can do in terms of sweeping the floor on Yom Tov, they must mean actually sweeping the floor. Okay, that's what the machloket was. So that's case number one. Now, case number two continues Tosefta. It says, "Ein manichin et hamugmar b'Yom Tov v'shal beit Rabban Gamliel manichin." Okay, that's exactly what we saw in our Mishnah. But again, a question now is going to be what precisely is the case? What's the case that we're talking about? That Chachamim said you can't do a mugmar you can't place mugmar on Yom Tov, and Rabban Gamliel says no, you can. So again, Amar Rabbi Eliezer bat Tzadok. Right, essentially, you're having machloket. Yeah, you have a machloket about what was the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. So what's the best way to prove that? He says, you're saying he said this, and you're saying he said this. Well, I was in Rabban Gamliel's house on Yom Tov, and I saw what they did. Okay. Now he says, we went there. So they wouldn't actually place the mugmar on Yom Tov. What would they do? al daskaot shel balzel. Okay, they would bring these al daskaot, sort of these like metal tubes. Umashnin otan me'erev Yom Tov, upokakin mikvehen me'erev Yom Tov. Right, so before Yom Tov, they would put the spice inside these metal tubes, and they would close them up, and then lemachar כשהולכים לעשות פותחים את נקביהם ונמצא בית מתקמם אליו. And then on Yom Tov, when the guests would come in, you would open up these tubes, and then the smell would come out, and that would and that's equivalent. That's the equivalent of placing mugmar in the house. So again, if that was the case, that's what Rabbi Eliezer is arguing here. That's what Rabban Gamliel allowed, and that's what the Chachamim forbade. Amrulon ken af Shabbat mutar lasot ken. Says no. Well, what do you that you could do on Shabbat? Meaning, what exactly is the machloket? What is it that Rabban Gamliel is saying you can do that Chachamim are saying that you can't do? It can't be that, because there's no problem. You're just opening up these. You've done all the melacha you've done before Yom Tov, and you're just opening up these adaskaot. So therefore, it must be the actual machloket is laniach mugmar, whether you can burn the incense in the first place to make the smell. So that's the that's the difficulty. In other words, Rav Asi said, we started off the Gemara. Rav Asi wanted to say what? He said machloket legamer, aval lariach divrei hakol mutar. Now it seems to be that lariach, in other words, to place it, to burn it, was exactly the machloket between Chachamim and Rabban Gamliel. So therefore, says the Gemara now, the 4 lines from the bottom of the page, it says Ela yitmar ach yitmar. Amar Rav Asi, machloket lariach, aval legamer asur. Okay, so he says Rav Asi, so now he changes. He says no, the machloket between Rabban Gamliel and Chachamim is lahariach. In other words, can you just in the edge, in the open air, can you place the spices on top of the coals in order to create the smell? Okay, and that's going to be for Hanata Guf, as we said, and that essentially is like Ochel Nefesh. But the machloket between Chachamim, this is what Rashi was saying. The machloket between Chachamim and Rabban Gamliel is whether you're allowed to do this to create the smell. Is that a Shaveh Kol Nefesh or not? Seemingly, according to Rabban Gamliel, it's okay. According to Chachamim, no. Aval legamer, in other words, to do this incense, not just sort of get the smell in the air, but to do it on your clothes, that is going to be asur. That is forbidden according to everybody. Even Rabban Gamliel says you can't do that, because that's not Ochel Nefesh. That's just for the sake of smell of your clothes. Okay, so that is regarding this incense and creating the smell. So we say to do it just to create the smell in the air. That Rabban Gamliel says yes. Chachamim say no. In order to do it on your clothes, that everybody says no. Now, what about, says the Gemara, another question? What about in order for smoking? The kavanah here is smoking fruits. You're going to do it in such a way that the smell is going to go into the fruits, and you're going to smoke them. Are you allowed to do that? Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba amar Rav asur, v'Shmuel amar mutar. Okay, one opinion says no, one opinion says yes. Rav Huna amar asur. Rav Huna says it's forbidden. Why? Because you're doing the melacha here of extinguishing. Rashi says, actually, maybe before that, let's just see the Rashi before. And Rashi, from where he goes from Maula Hashem, he says, Pelot be'ashan besamim liklot tama bosem. Right? You are essentially you're burning these smells, these perfumes, and you're going to place the fruits on top in order to have the taste or the smell and the taste of the perfume and of the spices that's going to be smoking the fruit. So he says the first opinion says asur. Says Rashi asur the tafnuk yeterahu. This is a pampering way. This is luxurious. This is not something which is shaveh kol nefesh. It's only very fancy people do. And in this process of smoking, you're performing an av melacha. When you put the spices on top of the coals, so you are extinguishing. You're extinguishing the fire. Shmuel says it's permitted. The ochel nefeshu, for the sake of food. Meaning it's considered a legitimate need, and poor people would do it as well. Just they don't do it because they don't have the means, but they would. Ketubot goes into the whole sugya of shaveh kol nefesh. It's like talking about, there's a discussion there about whether you can slaughter a tzvi, a deer on Yom Tov. Deer is a very luxurious food. So do you say that it's a shaveh kol nefesh? And do you say, well, if you had a tzvi, you would or not? Okay. So we said, so first explanation is that the av melacha here is mechabeh. You can't perform the melacha because it's not something which is shaveh kol nefesh. That's that opinion. So back in the Gemara, right, second last line. So Rav Huna amar asur mnei shemechabeh. Samar le Rav Nachman v'nei mamam mnei shemav'ir. He says, actually, don't say that it's you're extinguishing, but really you are mav'ir. When you're lighting the psamim, you're actually causing the fire to grow. So he says, no. What happens is when you place the psamim on the coals, he says, amar le tchilato mechaber v'sofo mav'ir, starts off extinguishing a little bit, and then it causes mavir, and therefore I was talking about that which you come to first. So then the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda al gabei gechalim asur, al gabei cheres mutar. Okay, we're going to see a very, very interesting contemporary halachic discussion that comes out of this sugya. So Rav Yehuda says, if you're doing this on over coals, you're placing the as we've just explained, you're placing the spices over coals, that's going to be forbidden because you're causing mechabeh and you're causing the coals to be extinguished and to be relit as well. Aval, and now the top of the next daf says al gabei cheres mutar. If you're going to light it on top of clay, on top of pottery, that is going to be allowed. Because here, essentially, you're lighting this psamim on top of this. You're heating up the psamim on top of this pottery. You're not causing that, like the case of coals, to be extinguished. So he says you can do that. And v'Rabba amar al gabei cheres nami asur mishum dekar molid reich. So then Rabba says no. Says even if you're doing it on top of a piece of pottery as well, that is going to be forbidden. Why? Because you are molid reicha. Says Rashi, the molid reicha shenichnas b'cheres shelo haya boleach v'asur midrabanan. He says you are burning this ends. You're burning these spices on top of the pottery. You're causing the smell to go. Now before it was just an ordinary piece of pottery. Now it's a smelly piece of pottery. Okay, you are incorporating the smell into it. Your molid reicha. That's what Rashi says. It didn't have a smell before. V'asur midrabanan. This is going to be an asur d'Rabbanan. Shamolid davar chadash karovu lo'oseh melacha chadasha. Says Rashi that when you incorporate something new that is similar to performing a melacha. you're creating something new. You're creating this new smell. That is the molid reach. And then says the Gemara, Rabba v'Rav Yosef, the Amri Tavayu, Schufe kasa ashilai b'yomata v'asur, maitama mishum deka molid reich. Okay, so he said, so both of them agree, both Rabba and Rav Yosef say that Sachufe kasa ashilai, to take a cup, you have a cup of perfume, and you place it on top of ashilai, on top of clothes, or you pour it on top of the clothes, that you would not be allowed to do on Yom Tov. Why? Again, because you are molid reach in the clothes. You are creating out a smell that wasn't there in the first place. Okay, this is why, by the way, this is why there's discussion halacha when it comes to deodorant. A person is allowed to use deodorant on Yom Tov and Shabbos. A person should use deodorant on Yom Tov and Shabbat. But that is where you spray deodorant on one's body, right, to prevent the smell. But to spray deodorant directly onto one's clothes, that would be a problem. That would be based on this, precisely based on this Gemara. But what I say is very, very interesting. Let's maybe carry on a little bit in the Gemara. Maybe this discussion might start today. We'll carry on tomorrow. But now the Gemara asks the question. It says, "Ma'ishna mimololo umeliach bo, v'kotmo umeliach bo." Okay, how is this different if you have the spices, you have the atzei psamim in your hand, and you rub them together in your hand, and then you smell? Why is that any different? The smell wasn't there in the first place, and now it is, right? So it says Rashi, "Ma'ishna mimololo umeliach bo detana gabe atzei psamim mololo ben etzbotav kedei leotzi lecho." You take these herbs, whatever, in your hand, and you rub them together, or you wet it, right? And there it's allowed that you're allowed to have the smell. So it says, there, the smell already existed in these psamim. You're just maybe enhancing it. You may be increasing it, but the smell was always there. But here, you are introducing a new smell that didn't exist in the piece of, in the shards or in the clothes or whatever it is. That is why it's called molid recha, that there was no smell there, but yeah, you're introduced. So we see a few very, very important things from this Gemara. We see that you cannot there is a concept of molid recha, of introducing a smell where it didn't exist. We said that if the smell already exists, but you're simply enhancing it, you're simply strengthening it, okay, that would be permitted. But to create something new out of nothing, that is not. So why do I say, where does this halakha comes up in a place that we may not have expected at all, may be surprising. But one of the first tshuvot to deal with the telephone on Shabbos. Okay, it's in a sefer called Beit Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak Shmelkes, and he has a tshuva. It's actually in the Hashmatot. The Hashmatot are the extra parts at the back of the sefer that you left out in the original tshuvot, because it didn't seem so important at the time. But he's asked about a new invention, which is called the telephone. And he's asked whether this new invention can be used on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And what he says over there is very, very interesting. He says, first of all, you have a problem of hashmat kol, of it's going to make a sound, and that's something you're not allowed. But he says that this device, this telephone, cannot be used on Yom Tov. Why? On Shabbos. He says it's going to be an Isur D'Rabbanan because it's similar to the idea of molid reach. This concept of introducing a smell into somewhere wasn't there. So he says with the telephone, you are what he coins the term, says molid zerem. You are creating a circuit. You're closing an electric current, an electric flow that wasn't there before. You are introducing that. He compares that idea of molid zerem to the idea here in this Gemara of molid reach, which is very, very interesting. And this is really one of the first tshuvot to deal with electricity on Shabbat. And the concept of people ask, why can't you use electricity on Shabbat? Again, the technology has changed a lot since those days, and we have to examine whether it still applies and how it still applies. But this is later on the Chazon Ish came, and the Chazon Ish said that you can't use electricity because it's a malacha d'oraita of boneh. Okay, but probably the majority view amongst many of the poskim and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and there's fascinating letters, correspondence that goes between the Chazon Ish and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach about electricity on Shabbat. But he says it wouldn't be an Isur D'Oraita, but it would be an Isur D'Rabbanan of molid zerem, just like here you have molid reach, over there with the electricity of molid zerem. And the other thing, the entirety of Machon Somet essentially is built on this Gemara. Because what do we see? We see that molid reach is only a prohibition if you're creating something new, but if the smell is already there and you're enhancing it, so then it's allowed. Okay, so therefore, based on that and based on the idea of the Beit Yitzchak, we would say the following. We would say creating a new current is called molid zerem. But if the current was already there and the current was already flowing all the time, and you're just changing it, well, then that would be permitted. And that is how all the the Kalnoit and all the machshirim of Machon Somet and everything works on this, that you constantly have the electric flow, you constantly have that going, and you just raise that or lower that according to your needs. That would be you've not created anything new, and that would be a permissible way to use the electricity on Shabbat. Obviously, we're only talking about cases of need, cases of refuah, or cases of security, etc. And the reason for that is, first of all, there are dissenting views. So we have the view of the Chazon Ish, which says it's forbidden anyway. But also what that would do in terms of the character of Shabbat, and in terms of maybe of the Zachol and other things like that. We can talk about it more tomorrow. But that essentially, that whole sugya, it's fascinating that we're dealing with some obscure Gemara about burning incense on Yom Tov and the smell that's going to come, and that essentially forms the bait up for the whole discussion of electricity on Shabbat. Okay, Ad Kan. Have a great day, everybody, and we will be back tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, God willing.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.